There's some news coming out of Eagles practice today where Eagles offense coordinator Mike Groh said he hopes to get Mike Wallace back. He said hopefully Mike's progressing. We'll get a chance to get him back here this season. He had a broken fibula, John. We talked about him a little bit yesterday. But was that kind of an eye-opening comment from Mike Groh to say, hey, we might hope to get him back? Because yesterday we kind of talked and said, more Mack Hollins over a while. So it sounds like that's going to be something to watch as the next couple of weeks unfold here.
Yeah, no, I don't think it was that eye-opening. If anybody's ever seen a Mike Groh press conference, he tries to keep the information as limited as possible. That was yesterday, by the way, not today. Practice ramps up again tomorrow. But sort of it's the same as we said. The Eagles have a decision to make, and the fact that Mack Hollins will be ready and healthy in theory before Mike Wallace, you want that deep threat for your offense. So if you can't go outside the organization, trade for that type of player with the deadline coming up at October 30th, then you have a decision to make. You're not going to bring them both back. So you kind of say, do you want Mack Hollins or is Mack Hollins not good enough? The Eagles might have come to that conclusion after watching him in training camp, and then maybe they do wait for Mike Wallace. But there is going to be an opportunity to bring two of those guys off injured reserve back, and they both should be healthy before the end of the season. Mike, though, later than Mack Hollins.
Yeah, what's the rule? So if Hollins is healthy, do they have to, like, after the 8 weeks make a decision, or can he kind of, like, they got to make a decision once the 8 weeks is up, right?
Well, week 9, yeah, that's the earliest you can bring somebody back. It's got to be 8 weeks on injured reserve, so depends when the guy was injured. And then, yeah, you have to make a decision on who you're going to. Remember, before the old rule, you would have to say it beforehand. So you would have to place somebody on injured reserve and say, this guy is designated to return. They've changed that now to where you can sort of make the decision as you go. And that puts more strategy into it because guys are not going to be healthy at the same time, and that's kind of what the issue the Eagles are facing.
Yeah, I don't know, John, what to really expect from Mack Hollins if he's the guy that they go to for two reasons. One, I just don't know the limited resume that he has in the NFL, despite him having a certain skill set that they're lacking. And two, it's hard for me to think that just because Mack Hollins is on this team on a Sunday lining up against another team's defense, that they're just going to open it up and throw the ball 30, 40 times downfield over the next month.
Yeah, and I don't think it's about that. I think it's about the presence. I've talked about it a lot. I've advocated that they put Shelton Gibson on the field, acknowledging that he can't run a route except a go route, but I don't think they need that. I think if you look back to last season and Torrey Smith was not an effective receiver. He was not a good receiver, but he can run. And you do have to acknowledge that presence on the field, and I think that opens things up underneath for the Alshon Jeffries and the Zach Ertz and the Nelson Aguilars and even Dallas Goedert now. So I think it's just having somebody on the field that can run, to be honest. And the Eagles don't have that right now. They've been sort of cobbling it together. Jordan Matthews has gotten deep. Shelton against the Vikings got deep. And Gunter Burr was talking yesterday about doing it by committee. But when you see a guy like Jordan Matthews make a big play down the field, it's because you're fooling the opposing defense. It's because there's a busted coverage. It's not because the guy is just athletically superior and outrunning a cornerback down the field. I think that part of it is what the Eagles are missing. And it's not about having Randy Moss. It's just about having somebody who can threaten that defense and open up everything else.
Yeah, I mean, and part of that, too, is you have some trust in the quarterback that he's going to get the air under the ball to let a guy like Gibson just go get it. Because Gibson showed, I mean, heck, it was only one throw, but he went up over, in fact, the picture that you used at 97.3ESPN.com is Gibson going up over Hughes a first-round pick and making a play on that ball. So he showed that he can go up and go get the ball. So if you trust the quarterback to get it out there, why not trust the kid to go down the field and go get it?
Yeah, I can't explain it. I've asked everybody. I've asked Doug. I've asked Mike Rowe, and we've asked Gunnar Brewer yesterday, why can't he get on the field? Because it's pretty clear that this roster was built, and by the way, properly, for Mike Wallace to be that guy. And then sort of the break glass in case of emergency was Mack Hollins, who did it in college in North Carolina, but they both got hurt. So there's only one guy left on this team that can do it, and it's Shelton Gibson. But for some reason, he made that big play against the Vikings, and they reward him with less snaps against the Giants. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, to be honest.
Yeah, it's like the game that my man Bryce Treggs caught the one ball against the Giants, and then we never saw him again. It's like you make a play, you're out. You're never playing again.
Well, there's difference. I mean, when Bryce Treggs was here, I think it was a little bit different. I wouldn't be advocating for Shelton Gibson to play if Mike Wallace was here or if even Mack Hollins was here. I'm only advocating it because they don't have anybody else to do that particular job. And it's not like I'm expecting him to catch 6 receptions a game or get 100 yards. He's out there to do one specific thing, and he can run, and I think he's capable of putting up Torrey Smith numbers, which are not exactly good.
John, I'm looking at Carolina, brutal on the road so far without a win. I know it's still early in the season, and before that Vikings game, I think, all right, well, it's a lock. Anybody coming to Philadelphia, good luck in trying to play. But just with the backdrop of what we've been talking about, not having Mike Wallace or even down to Shelton Gibson on the field on the outside, what are you looking at with this Eagles offense specifically that they've done right? And I know it hasn't been a lot, but they've done right so far that should be a lock as far as how they can do it successfully against Carolina's defense.
Well, I don't think they've done anything all that well until the Giants game.
That's fair.
And I think, and you have to put in the equation that the Giants are a really bad football team. So I'm not sure how much we can take out of that particular game. The one positive you can hang your hat on is they finally played a relatively clean game, and they stayed away from those goofy penalties of I mentioned Shelton Gibson not getting on the field. Maybe the reason he didn't get on the field was because against Minnesota, he couldn't line up correctly. He was the guy who had 2 penalties for the illegal formation. So that's the kind of stuff that will keep you off the field. It's also the kind of stuff you should be able to teach someone. And this team has constantly talked about shooting itself in the foot. I think they have a lot, and that stopped against the Giants. So I think that's the one positive thing you could look at, more than the actual individual performances, because the Giants are kind of a mess as a football team.
John, I don't know how much you and Mike have talked about this the past show or two, but Jason Peters is really interesting to me, and I want your thoughts on him because now he has a bicep injury. He's been dealing with a nagging quad injury. He's 36 years old, and he's still productive when he's out there. He's been out there a lot, but he doesn't seem like his old self, is the same Jason Peters that we've seen every single year for a very long time when he is healthy. So how concerned are you that he possibly eventually goes down for good, and now you have Vaitai and you have another situation on your hands?
Well, I think you should be concerned. I dated that back to training camp. I thought everybody kind of overlooked the fact that this is a 36-year-old guy who's coming off a torn ACL. He's not the most svelte guy in the world. I always say if you're ever at an Eagles practice, it's kind of difficult to watch Jason get ready for practice. He's got a 15-minute stretching routine and just what he's got to go through to get ready for practice. Father time is coming up and coming up quickly. And there was a lot of talk if this torn biceps was the bad kind around the elbow, that this might be it for his career. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of that talk. And, I always talk about the Giants making a poor decision with Eli Manning through emotion. It's not nearly as bad, but I see some of that with the Eagles because they have such respect for Jason Peters and such reverence for him. And there's a lot of talk that the reason Isaac Seumalo replaced Stefan Wisniewski was not because Wiz was doing a bad job. That's because that's what Jason wanted. And then you talk about Jeff Stoutland talking yesterday. In his opinion, Jason's going to try to play against the Panthers, which I think is insanity, especially when you look at the schedule and you have the London game after this, and then you have the bye. So if you give him a couple weeks off, hopefully you can get him healthy for the second half of the season. But it's kind of what Jason wants, Jason gets. And that's not how you should run a football team.
That's interesting. John McMullen here on the Sports Bash Boardwalk Honda Hotline, 97.3 ESPN. The one area that we kind of touched on this a bit yesterday, but I saw a commercial this morning with Rodney McCloud. He's doing something with the cancer, and it popped in my mind like, that was such a position of concern 2 weeks ago, and it seems like quickly – is that position still a concern? I mean, have they figured out a way to kind of get around that McCloud injury? Do we feel comfortable at that safety spot now?
No, that's a huge concern, especially because remember, not only is Rodney hurt, but Corey Graham is out with a hamstring. Now Sidney Jones is out with a hamstring. Now it's unlikely. Just knowing Doug Peterson, he called Sidney Jones week to week. And Doug Peterson terminology, that means he's not playing this week. Now, we'll see on Corey Graham.
And Sidney Jones could be out multiple weeks, right?
Exactly. And what the Eagles did in the Giants game was they moved Avonte Maddox from safety to nickel corner, and then they had to rotate Rasul Douglas in at safety. So at least in the short term, there's a ton of concern at that particular position. And while I think Avonte Maddox deserves a lot of credit for what he's done, and if you think about where he's come, he was an outside corner at Pitt, moved to nickel corner. They tried to teach him that. Then he was forced to safety through injury of Rodney McCloud. Then he's back at nickel cornerback, and eventually he's going to go back to safety. This guy's a fourth-round pick. That's a lot to put on his plate. So I think that's going to be an issue as the season wears on, and the Rodney McCloud injury is a big injury for this team.
John, how much, if at all, have you sensed, because you were talking specifically from the outside about how much we can extract from that Giants game, how much have the players kind of let on either emotionally or just kind of even keel about that big win? I mean, it was big, and it's hard for people not to be emotional after they've struggled to get that type of victory. But as you mentioned, it's kind of like throw everything out against a divisional opponent. How much identity can you really have? What's the emotion like right now of the average Eagle player?
Well, I think they felt like they answered a lot of questions. There was a lot of hand-wringing before that game by not only fans but media as well, and people questioning where this team was. So I think from that standpoint, they're proud that they put that type of performance in, but they also realize it doesn't mean much if they don't follow it up with a win at home against Carolina, who's a good team, but as you mentioned, struggles on the road, and is not a great team by any stretch of the imagination. So if they lose that game, all of a sudden, that Giants win doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I would imagine. And that's going to be the biggest thing moving forward. And you get it right now, especially with the extra day or two, technically two, that they get to prepare for this game. How much has Doug Peterson, Jim Schwartz, how much have they talked about using the extra time against the Panthers?
Well, Jim talked about it a lot because this is a sort of a different week because of Cam Newton in the design quarterback runs, which have actually increased this year with Norv Turner coming in as the offensive coordinator. They've gone back remember a couple of years ago they were concerned about the beating that Cam Newton was taking in times, and they scaled back that. Now they've said the heck with it because that's what he does best, and they put that back into the offense, and it's a big part of their offense, and it's something you typically don't see. You might see a lot of mobile quarterbacks, but nobody wants them running a significant portion of the time because nobody can handle the pounding and continue to play quarterback. Cam's different in that way. He's bigger than every linebacker he's going to see. He's bigger than some defensive linemen in this league. So he can take that type of punishment. And it's almost like playing – if you talk about college football, people hate to play Navy. They hate to play Georgia Tech because you can't prepare for a triple option because nobody uses it. I mean, you can't spend a lot of time defending that type of offense. It doesn't make sense, and it's not that drastic, but it's difficult to spend a lot of your time preparing for quarterback runs, design runs, because nobody does it except Carolina. So it's good to have a couple extra days to prepare.
John McMullen, more on the Eagles and Panthers throughout the week here on the Sports Bash. Don't forget, Mosher, McMullen, and Krause Thursday night live at the Landmark. Check those guys out live. It's been a great show. The guys have been giving away Eagles tickets almost weekly. And
that place is rocking, man.
Yeah?
They all come out for John, but it's like the novelty act we talked about last year.
All the college girls come out for me.
Whatever cologne you're wearing, John, I got to be honest, you're bringing them out.
That's Thursday night, 6 o'clock here on 97.3. John's back tomorrow here on the Sports Bash. Thanks, pal.
All right, thanks, guys.